Oh yeah, I hear you. I remember I always studied American English, and when I did my teacher training in the National Teacher Training Institute, um, everything was very British, you know. So I had to start speaking like this, which I hated. And one day I said something in my phonology class, and my teacher looked at me and said, "Oh, Gabriel, stop mumbling." And I said, "Well, it's your fault. I speak American English, and you're forcing me to speak British English." She looked at me and said, in her impeccable Her Majesty's English, "My dear, your English is neither British nor American. It's in the middle of the Atlantic and sinking by the second." That's what I remember. Well, for the past 30 years, I've been a teacher educator. And I've been very, very lucky to be in the company of great students, amazing student teachers, who actually go the extra mile and help you teach better. And over these years, one of the things that I have done is criticize teacher education as it comes, right? If I were to ask you, which of these do you agree with? You don't have to share, just think to yourselves. Which one or ones do you agree with? Okay, do you have a few? Yes? What we are going to do in the next 40 minutes or so is try to look at these things. These are all maxims about teacher education, and they respond to different moments in our history of language teachers. So what we're going to try and do is advocate for a new model for teacher learning, a model that responds to our needs as teachers and not to the mandates of the curriculum of teacher education or the tradition of teacher education. Actually, if we look at traditions, we need to assume a few things about teacher education. Was it easy for you to become a teacher? No. Actually, learning to teach is one of the most complex endeavors. It requires, first of all, questioning our own assumptions. We're all the time questioning ourselves, am I doing it right? Is this the right way to do it? What would my trainer say? And also, we learned language in a certain way. And what if the way we learned, our teachers say, that's garbage, that doesn't work? So we have to question our own assumptions. Now, unfortunately, we cannot spontaneously become a teacher, right? Our learning needs to be mediated. It needs to be facilitated by somebody who has been teaching longer than we have. And in a true communal spirit, in an ideal world, learning to teach should be a collaboration between the old-timers and the newcomers. But for that, we need spaces to interact, we need practice, and we need to do away with that hierarchy of, I am the almighty teacher trainer, and you are the lowly future teacher, right? That interaction between the old-timer and newcomer does not have to be indoctrination. You do what I tell you, and if you do otherwise, it's wrong. It has to be a way of enabling adaptive expertise. What is adaptive expertise? We are not being trained to teach a book or in a place. We are being trained to teach people. So that requires that we can adapt our teaching to different situations. And one thing that nobody recognizes is that in becoming a teacher and continuing to grow as a teacher is a process of self-authorship. I'm writing my own story. And that story has to be told in my words. So, what is the core of teacher training? What is the core of teacher education? There are three cores that we can look at. Some programs rely heavily on core practices. This is how you do it. Others in core concepts. That is what you do. But then, good teachers are born in the confluence of core practices, concepts, and also core dispositions. You can know a lot about teaching and know how to do teaching, but if your attitude towards your students is not correct, you are the worst teacher ever, right? So those are the core dispositions. Knowing how to do things when and why, and for whom and against whom. So if we look at the traditions in teacher education, they have been hanging around for many, many years. Let's see if this was your experience when you were doing your teacher training. There is one tradition which is called look and learn. Your trainer demonstrated a way of doing things and you had to replicate them. Was that the way you were trained? If it is, raise your hand. Yes? Okay, another tradition. Read and learn. This is what the theory says we should do, so this is what you will do. We read research and we apply it in the classroom. Was this your tradition? Yes? Then, closer in time, there's another tradition which we can call think and learn. It started in the 1980s, and it was all about the reflective practitioner. So the idea is you do, and then you think about what you've done. Is that the tradition that you were trained under? Yes, no? Okay, my God, I'm losing you. The thing with this tradition is it's very interesting and it's good, but it's individual. So the reflection about what works and what doesn't remains in my head and with my teacher trainer, and it's not socialized with my peers. And we know that we don't live in a bubble, right? There is a fourth tradition that is just emerging, and that is the one I would like to invite you to consider, which is the one called participate and learn. What does it mean? From the very first day of teacher training, we engage student teachers in teaching. That is what they are going to do in the future. And you may say, oh, but how can we do it in schools? We'll see how we can do it. There are two ways in which teacher training is done nowadays. One, which we could call curriculum-centric. That is to say, these are the contents that a teacher needs to know, right? And the other one is pedagogy-centric. If you read the abstract of my talk today, I said that I follow Loughran, who in 1997 said that of all the areas of education, teacher education is the one that doesn't have a pedagogy of its own. Either we do the same things that students are expected to do in the classroom, or we don't actually do more than read and try to apply things. So a curriculum-centric emphasis in teacher education is focused on what teachers need to learn. But honestly, think back to your teacher training. Did you have to learn everything that they asked you to learn? Was everything that you learned useful for your teaching? Eventually, right? As my son would say, one of my sons who had difficulty with mathematics, otro día más y no tuve que usar la inducción completa, right? Now, a pedagogy-centric approach to teacher training is one where we look at the teacher-learner's needs. Every teacher-learner or student-teacher, I don't know what you call them here in Mexico, we call them practicantes in Uruguay, which I hate. Because to me, a practicante is somebody who's studying to be a doctor, and they give you injections, so negative connotation. But a pedagogy-centric looks for ways in which we can teach people to be the best teacher they can be, knowing that not everybody is going to be the best teacher. So, one thing that this pedagogy-centric view does is it looks at the student-teacher self-authorship, and it is needs-based. So, if you indulge me, what I would like to do is to show you how I do teacher education with my students. Not to my students, but with my students. And this is a process that took me a good 10 years, but what you're going to see is the first module in our teacher training course, which is, let's start with bits. What are bits? BITS. BITS stands for Basic Instructional Techniques. Every student who comes to us wants to be a teacher. They want to be in center stage. And they think that being a teacher is standing in front of people and talking at them. Now, we see classes which may be very creative, but who speaks the most in those classes? The teacher. And is there interaction among the students? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. It's luck of the draw. So what I'm going to present is a way to enable teacher learning. Not to train somebody, is to enable somebody to become the best teacher they can be. In this module, which is our first module, these are their learning outcomes. We have a curriculum based on competencies, and we are required in each module to do this. So by the end of this module, which lasts approximately a month, right? Students should be able to select appropriate basic instructional techniques to use in their teaching practice. They go to teaching practice from day one. They are under the supervision of a mentor, right? And they do practice, 2 with the mentor, and 1 year with their own groups in public education in Uruguay. Then it's not just enough to be able to select, you have to be able to apply the bits in their teaching practice, and also justify the use of those and the effectiveness of those bits, and account for areas of development. Where do they have to keep looking at, right? Now, we've all been language learners, and we've all had, I would say, on average, 13,000 hours of observing teachers. So if you have been observing somebody or somebody's for 13,000 hours, you're kind of an expert on observation, okay? Now, the problem we have is that those hours, we have observed what teachers do, but we don't know why they do those things. And let's think about our teachers. Some of them were very good, and we learned a lot with them. Some others sucked, and we had to learn on our own. That experience of thousands and thousands of hours is called the apprenticeship of observation. And research says that that is what stands between me understanding what I need to give my learners and me just trying to do something to keep my learners engaged. So the first thing that we have to do is disclose the apprenticeship of observation. Bring to bear that apprenticeship of observation. How did we do it in this module? We started with pictures from teachers and students from our own schools. Now, mind you, we asked for authorization to take these pictures from the parents of the students, and also we required that they all wore masks, because we built this during the pandemic, right? It was right after coming back to the pandemic. So if I show you 3 pictures, and I ask you, talk to the person next to you, which of the 3 classrooms, and you have to choose one, which of the 3 classrooms represents your language learning experience the best? You are not going to have the perfect one, but which one is the closest, right? And then, just by having this little discussion, the idea is we use a lot of paper on the walls. People just write things on the wall, like what their experience was like, right? In describing the classroom, does this have a, here. If you look at this classroom, students are sitting in a horseshoe, the teacher is at the front. In this one, the students are in rows, the teacher is at the front but not seen. Here, we have the students working in groups. The three are language learning classrooms. The three of them are. Which one is the closest? Once we have brought out those things, I needed to get my students to notice what good teaching is. But I couldn't take all my students to the schools. I couldn't rely on what they were doing with their cooperating teacher. So I had a very particular student, very creative, very dynamic, but appalling at the academics, right? And I'm going to say his name. His name is Martin Giannoni. Why? Because he was an expert illustrator. So when they say, Martin, since we cannot go into the classrooms and recording a class, you know, is very difficult, what if I gave you a script of a lesson? Can you create a comic? And then we use that as this is the way that you do it. And this is the result. This is, for Module 1, Welcome to English Class, the first lesson in English language teaching, right? And then what we do is we go frame by frame, asking for similarities and differences between your experience as a language learner and what is happening here. I'm going to show you a close-up of the first panel. And what do you notice, perhaps that you don't do in your own teaching? Pardon me? Numbers, or she's pointing. She's pointing, yeah. And she's waving. She's waving with her hand and pointing at the board. But do you notice anything? Sorry? There's somebody on a cell phone. What else? It's an inclusive class, yes. By law, we have all sorts of students. The full, wonderful diversity of life. Yep. Yep. Anything else? The teacher is saying, hello, how are you? I mean, is that teacher-centered? Well, we can question it. We can question it. And precisely this construction is what happens. We go frame by frame. But there are things that I want you to notice. The teacher here writes the date on the board. And people say, what, do you write the date on the board? Yeah? You do? But no, but why do you write the date on the board? My student teachers generally say, oh, that is such a waste of time. And I say, what is the most important material your students have? Their notebook. And they need to know when they did things, right? And I need to know as well. Then here I have an agenda. Do you know what an agenda is? Do you use an agenda? Do you use it at the beginning of the class? Do you use it at the end of the class? At the beginning, it depends. The way we use the agenda is the teacher communicates the learning outcomes to the students, asks them to self-assess how close or how far from the learning outcomes they are. Then the teacher writes the agenda, and we use that agenda as closure of the lesson. The last 5 minutes, we go back to the agenda and we play challenges. For example, who can tell me a word, a new word that we learned during the listening? Who can say 3 things that appeared in the reading? This kind of challenge also allows the students to realize the takeaways of the lesson. Because in general, you ask, I teach mostly teenagers, what did you do in English class today? They say, nothing. Or, hablamos. But what did you learn? That doesn't happen. So that is the second stage, noticing the difference between the way you were taught and the way you are expected to teach your students. Next, we have accessing. Accessing is when we look at the theory. And there we have rules in our institution. 50% of the bibliography we share with student teachers in the university has to have been written by Latin American researchers. Why? Because we have been colonized. Most of the methodology books we studied with were written by people in the United Kingdom, who perhaps, with some exceptions, never taught a class of monolingual students in Guadalajara. But yet they tell me, use English only. And expect your students to use English only. Come on, give me a break. It doesn't happen. What it does, it frustrates me as a new teacher. So what we do is, we're writing a book on this now. We are writing the methods course book as part of my sabbatical, right? That is my contribution to Uruguay. And then I retire, and I become a happy teacher, one who teaches for fun, not for the salary. Okay, so this is something that we do. Remember, we started with what the student teacher's learning experience of language was. So we bring back to the principles for these bits. These bits, these basic instructional techniques, come from different methods. But we are not going to tell them directly which methods they come from. We're going to ease them into that. Remember, we are trying to enable learning, to get them to use the resources and to understand. So one activity that we do is we start with the principles. Which of these principles were taken into consideration when you were learning English? And then let's go to the comic. Which of these principles appear in the comic? And then tell me the features of those principles. And the features are, for example, we need exposure to samples of real language in use, which we call input, in order to acquire language. So what are the features of that principle, the implications? Well, use as much English in class as possible, use minimal translation into language one, but that has a purpose. Grade your language as a teacher, and then use authentic materials. Once we've worked through the accessing, and in general we have between, from what is looking like, the book is at the process of being written and designed at the same time. About 40 pages per module of theory, let's say. But theory intervened with activities and practice, right? From accessing, for this particular module, the theory consists of how to grade your language, how to use the board, how to elicit, how to give instructions, how to correct students, and how to drill. Drill because our students, in my case, in Uruguay, they are not exposed to English. They are not familiar with the sound system of English. In general, they cannot produce what they cannot hear. And there's a moment in class where they need to be able to say it. So we drill. And the content, all the content, answers these questions. Where do these techniques come from? For example, we start with grading language because many of our students have heard about Krashen and his hypothesis. Well, we know now that of the 5 hypotheses that Krashen created, only 1 has been proved. The other 4 have been discarded and proved wrong. So the input hypothesis, that input which is a little bit beyond what the students know now, for Krashen was a new grammatical structure. And we know that we don't learn in a grammatical sequence. We learn through meaning, right? Through being able to do something. From noticing in our attempts to use the language what works and what doesn't. So the grading of language, how does a teacher grade the language? What is the advice? And then we have practice activities. You are teaching a class of B2 level in the CFR. Give instructions for this or do that, right? For each of these techniques, where they come from, how they align with current theories of second language acquisition, what language level do students have, which bits work best at each level. How about the use of language one in the classroom? And here we went full blast on the latest theories of translanguaging. Because translanguaging is a form of language learning, insofar as one of the languages uses the language we are being taught, of course, right? So how about that imposition, no Spanish in the classroom? No. It's Spanish when Spanish is needed, right? But we look at the theory. We read the originators of the theories. So this accessing is what is going to provide from the learner's own experience to how we think they should be teaching students, to what the theory says. We then go on to doing something called bridging. What is bridging? Somebody here said today, lack of practice was one of the negative things about early teacher training. And practice alone does not guarantee good teaching. What is more, if you teach children or teenagers, you're all the time worried about how can I satisfy their learning needs, how can I protect their emotional side. Now with a teacher trainee, apparently they are not people because we seem not to take that into consideration. In this framework, what I have done is I've created a moment which takes about a week's lesson where we try things out through micro-teaching in our teacher training classroom. And how do we do it? Using examples taken from real classes. This that you have there is a transcript of students doing group work, and they were given these instructions. They were beginning, high beginning students, okay? And they were talking about food. They had a unit on food. And the thing was different food preferences. So the task for that unit in high school was, you have these friends coming to dinner, right? Each of them has a particularity regarding food. You have a novo-lacto vegetarian, you have a vegan, you have a carnivore. So you have to work together to create a menu, a 3-course menu, for the people who will come to dinner in your house, right? And I'm going to read what the students were doing, and this is, we recorded them. I don't know if you can read it from the back. One of the students says, Anita, aperitif, salad and cheese. Ahora, Peter, lo mismo. Pero vamos de a uno, decirlo de vuelta que yo voy anotando. Look at this, right? Anita, aperitif, salad, and cheese. Peter, entree, cream potato and beans with salad and cheese and beans with sauce. Dessert, ice cream and yogurt. ¿Qué es? ¿Cómo se dice? Ay, no sé, debe decirse así. Se debe decir de otra manera, parece muy español. Peter, aperitif, which was appetizer, right? French fries. Entree, quinoa, burger, and stuffed zucchini. Chocolate and yogurt with strawberries. Aperitif, Priscilla, carrot and potatoes. Y entree, ¿qué dice? Dice noodles. Noodles with sauce and salad. Fruta. ¿Cómo se dice? Jaja. Fruit, pone ahí, fruit. Phoebe, aperitif vegetables and garlic bread. Entree, well, and they go on like this. They do this task, and you tell the teachers, what went wrong in this task? And they had them in instructions. So, pardon me? Well, they had different characters to satisfy. So they decided, and this is their own organization, vamos de a uno. It was their decision. You see, one of the kids said, these two have similar likes, so let's put them together. I said, no, vamos de a uno. Actually, what went wrong here is the instructions. Instructions were not properly given. The instructions including using the instructions to the activity. You have the description of each of the people, and also says, prepare a 3-course meal, appetizer, entree, and dessert, so that everybody enjoys their dinner. Here what they are doing is one menu per person. So how do we help student teachers overcome the situation? Well, one of the things that we use is scripts. You know what a script is? And we have scripts for the different bits. Notice, they looked at the bits at the beginning from their own perspective. We looked at them in the cartoon. We read about them. We tried to implement them, and it's wrong. So now I need to support, to scaffold my student teachers' learning. One of the things that we do, it's not the only thing, script. And this is first do this, then do that, then do that. And then we do it together. How many times do we do this? We do scripts. We also use, we write our own rubrics of what a good lesson should contain. And then it's time for them, when they are certain that they can do it, they go into the teacher training classroom with their mentor. And what the mentor and I and everybody else uses is the moment we call launching our new learning. The instructions are very clear. Use the following rubric in order to assess your teaching of a lesson implementing the theories and techniques discussed in this chapter. And the rubric is very exhaustive, right? Now, we build this rubric with the students. So my job was to facilitate their awareness raising. And where did they take the information? From their own experience, from what they saw in the cartoon, from the theory, from our own trials in class, and now they are going to do. What do you think happens when we reach this stage? That they go and do it. Do they get it right? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? But most of the cases, because they have been through this process of scaffolding, careful scaffolding of all learning of teaching, they do very well. in general, right? But this is not enough to put it into practice and complete a rubric. We need to extend their understanding. And how do we extend it? With different activities. Extending understanding means that students who did it well, they need to explore more activities and more ways of doing it well. Those who still have to struggle need to go back to the drawing board and set themselves personal goals, right? So we have some general questions in each module. That is a reflective journal. What is a reflective journal? We reflect about what we have learned and we have not learned yet. How we have learned it. And how do we work with it? In the first module, I take the reflective journal, half of my class, and I respond to them. And the other half exchange reflective journals with the ones whose journals I took, and they get responses from their peers. Progressively, the reflective journals are exchanged between them, and I only take a few and respond just to find. And the material in the reflective journals becomes part of our course. I anonymize some statements, and we start a lesson with, okay, we have a colleague here who has this problem. How can we help that colleague? But we don't say who it was. So you have these questions that guide your reflection. And then for the ones who really got it right, we give them more resources. For example, activities to group their students, concrete activities. How to use total physical response with beginners. People say, I say stand up, sit down, I'm doing total physical response. No, you're not. Total physical response has a sequence you have to follow. And then with teenagers, you're not going to have them put the banana on top of your head. That is not ridiculous. They feel ridiculous. But we can use total physical response storytelling with students, student teachers. How do we do meaningful drills, not mechanical drills? Chance, chain practice. And then we go to looking at how we can make student learning visible for them, for us, for the school, and for the parents. All these are parts of extending. And if they need to, they can also do this action plan. 2 things, and no more than 2 things, that you need to improve about this module. And you think to yourself, you set yourself an improvement goal, then you think of actions to undertake, who you're going to help request help from. How will you know that you have attained the goal? This is something that we learned from the theory of possible selves. We all have a picture of our possible selves, but sometimes that picture is distorted because of our limitations. And particularly when we exercise a new skill or new learning, and we encounter difficulties, we tend to see everything in black. If you remember your feedback, you ask your student, your teacher, for example, how did you feel about this lesson? And you start to say, this didn't work, this didn't work, this didn't work, and it's not that, right? So how will you know you have attained the goal? And last but not least, by which date? Because we only have a certain number of months in our semester, and I have to make sure that you have learned it, okay? So, I said that this is a framework to enable teacher learning. This enabling has 6 phases: engaging, noticing, accessing, bridging, launching, and extending. But they are not linear. And you don't need to start at the E. Why? Because the model is a model which is a framework that is flexible throughout a teacher's career. Yes, we have some moments, some key activities that we do, right? And each of them have their own reasons. basic, and each of them has their own tools. These are all the materials that we use in our courses. But why is this flexible? Because it combines three key kinds of learning. There are people who need to learn to see things because they cannot yet see them. There are other people who need to do things, to learn to do things, and other people who need to learn to become, how to use the correct dispositions, right? The reflective stance. So you can enter the framework anywhere you feel your teacher needs. But my advice is, because this is based on a thorough review of theory and of research on teacher learning, that, say, for example, one of your students needs, or one of your colleagues needs to learn how to do something new. Start with bridging, and then do the launching and the extending. But don't overlook, when you have time, going to the learning to see, right? Throughout this is what we call a mediated learning experience. Mediation, this support that student teachers get, comes from themselves, self-access, from the teacher, the proper scaffolding, from working with peers at their own level, collaborative learning, and also from being taught something by a peer, which we call reciprocal teaching, right? What does a teacher need to know? Well, now, our course, divided in 2 years, we have already completed these modules, right? The learning module, what is language learning, second language acquisition, etc. What is teaching? What does a lesson look like? How does a lesson get organized? The role of assessment. Then, how do you teach a language-focused lesson? How do you teach a communication-focused lesson? How do you teach an interpretive mode lesson, listening or reading? How do you teach an interactive mode lesson, which is students exchanging information? And how do you teach a presentational mode lesson? For example, students do project work and they present their project. There's a specific methodology for that. We do thematic units and course design. We go from the lesson to the unit, from the unit to the course. Active learning methodologies, and there we explore everything: problem-based learning, project-based learning, phenomenon-based learning. Then discipline management. I had a particular set of students who struggled terribly keeping discipline in the classroom. And, well, the chapter and the module was born out of that, looking for a model of that. The teaching of culture. In Uruguay, if you teach English, you don't teach culture. What is more, you know what the books in Uruguay are called? #Living Uruguay. So the thing our students can talk about are the charruas, were Indians who lived in Uruguay. And we drink mate, eat chorizos, and have asados. There's no, this is the regulations of the current authorities, right? But there's not a world outside Uruguay. In secondary is living Uruguay. In primary is experiencing Uruguay. So everything is about the native flora and fauna, most of which have no translation into English, right? And the last one, and this was the module that I wrote this year, is on teaching and learning with digital technologies. This year, my student teachers, they all went like, okay, what do we do about artificial intelligence? I said, okay, let's explore how people teach with technology. So in that module, we explored flipped learning, computer-assisted learning, the good old CAL, computer-assisted language learning, which has existed in the profession for many years. So a funny thing that we did is we used artificial intelligence to help us develop the unit on technology. So how did we do it? We created a lesson that they had to teach, right? And then we put the lesson plan into Chat GPT, and we said, use this lesson plan to create a technology-enhanced lesson. And we got the lesson plan. Now, take the original plan and create a flipped lesson, and then a hybrid lesson, a lesson with AI. And the results that we got, of course, they were not perfect. So we looked, and one was gamify this lesson. So we used the materials that AI gave us, we corrected them, and the student teachers taught them in their own groups. They chose the gamified lesson, and we all were able to see those as they were beautiful, the final products. And then what we did is we created rubrics on how to gamify a lesson, how to integrate AI in the lesson. So as you can see, everything comes from the classroom and is for the classroom. Why? Because this is my conviction. I follow A.J. Giuliani, who says that our job is not to prepare students for something. Our job is to help students prepare themselves for anything. Isn't that a beautiful quotation? And when we are enabling teacher learning, when we are facilitating, this is what we get. As I said, this is based on extensive bibliography, right? A lot of research, and it's soon going to be published as a book, free access book, hopefully. And the only thing I have to say is, thank you very much for listening. And we have a few minutes for questions if you have any. Any questions? Yes, our colleague there.
Uno, dos, tres, sí. ¿Me ayudas, por favor, con el micrófono? Ahí déjala, sí.
Thank you. I have a question about the way your groups work, because when you presented the framework, you mentioned that they can start at any stage of the framework. Does that mean that the course is self-directed, autonomous, asynchronous, or how does that work?
They are synchronous. We've done this in online blended courses with synchronous sessions and asynchronous work on the platform, but we also do it like this year. We've done it face-to-face. It depends on the level. There are 3 levels of, the methods course has 3 levels. The first year is just learning about teaching and learning. So for that, I follow the Enable framework. But then when I get them in the 4th year of the careers, they have their own group in a public education institution. Nobody to guide them, no mentors. They just have to survive. And which schools do they choose? The ones that are left, right? The ones, and they are generally in the periphery, or they are the inner city schools, the ones with the most difficult problems. So there, they had 2 years of methodology already. So they knew how to develop the skills. They knew how to do all those things. But now we needed to work on the core dispositions. And that is where we look at. In some cases, for example, with the discipline management thing, they couldn't see, to them, discipline problems were all the same, right? They couldn't see that some of them came from unfulfilled needs, others came because of students being anxious about their learning, right? So I needed to do something to help them see, right? And we went the Enable framework. But when we started with technology, they had already taught 2 years during the pandemic with technology. But what they did was just emergency remote teaching. There were no principles for incorporating technology. So there, we knew about technology and its potential. We needed to learn to do. So we started with the bridging. That is why we wrote the lesson plan, we fed it into AI, then we corrected it, and then we launched it. And then we say, yes, what else do we have to learn? And then they have to compile a portfolio, right? And one of the portfolio sections is research on a topic. I asked them to write a paper on the use of on principles for using technology in the classroom. So I went to the accessing to make sure that I tied all the loose ends. Okay?
Okay. May
Thank
I
you for
ask a
yes.
second question?
Can I sit down?
Sure.
Thank you.
You also said that the very first course in this teacher training program includes applying bits in their teaching practice. So they get real students from the very beginning?
Well, they go to a class taught by a graduate teacher in one of the schools close to the university. That is an agreement that we have. And the process is, I am the methods teacher in the college, and the mentor could be anybody who says, yes, you can come to my class, right? So I have no way of knowing for sure whether the teacher's pedagogy is good or not. And of course, I don't get into the ethical dilemma of having to comment on a colleague's teaching, right? Because I don't teach there. So what we did, or what we do, is I have a meeting with the cooperating teachers, and we agree on a process for the students. So when they start with the teacher, they observe for about a month and a half. They observe what goes on in the classroom with observation tasks. And after that, the teacher says, okay, today you do the opening of the lesson. Or today you're going to correct that, or the next class you're going to correct that activity. And the following class you are going to present this. So they are progressively relinquishing control to them. And we agreed with those cooperating teachers that the bits were the good starting point, because how do you correct students without offending them and making sure you correct? How do you make yourself understood? How do you grade language? How do you elicit? So that is why we start the course with the bits. You're welcome. Okay? No questions? Sure.
I want to say thank you very much for this great opportunity to be here. And any opportunity we can get that presentation?
I'm going to send it to Simon, and they can do whatever they want with it. Just one thing I realize now, Martin is going to kill me. I didn't put Martin's name in the illustration credit, so I'm going to make sure I do that. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Poor Martin, because...
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm old. I use Facebook. My children, my students want me to use other things, and I can't. And I am on... No, not TikTok. The other one, that every Instagram, because what I put in Facebook goes to Instagram. So I have an account there, right? But if you write Gabriel Diaz plus inglés, me encuentran. En YouTube hay bastantes videos también.
Pues muchas gracias, doctor.
Placer.
En el nombre de la Secretaría de Educación del Estado de Jalisco, en el marco de la quinta versión de Crea Academy, se hace entrega de este reconocimiento.
Muchísimas gracias.
Y por parte de la Dirección de Lenguas Extranjeras, otro más bonito, más grande.
Más grande.
Por parte de la Dirección de Lenguas Extranjeras.
Este es el que se encuadra y se pone en la oficina.
Ya. Y por favor, un aplauso.
Un placer estar de vuelta acá.
Quiero comentarles que el doctor Diaz Maggioli pues todo una odisea para poder estar con nosotros. Viene desde Asunción, Montevideo, mira, te ando confundiendo allá de Paraguay. Viene de Montevideo, Uruguay, así es que tuvo que hacer toda una travesía. Sabemos que no hay avión directo a Guadalajara, así es que muchas gracias.
De Uruguay no hay avión directo a ningún lado.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias, muchas gracias.
Por favor, un placer.
Va a estar con nosotros el día de mañana también y tiene una presentación en el main stage para que también lo busquen ahí y lo acompañen. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, por favor, a ustedes.